Okay, also, you've been playing some new openings for about 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Roughly
wanted to
6 weeks, yeah.
So I wanted to check in on how that's been going. I gave you a process of learning them, of spending the first 2 weeks just playing them, right? And then a couple weeks to look at some Grandmaster games in your openings.
Mm-hmm.
And then and only then, if you really wanted to, you could look at some actual like variations or things like that.
Yeah, I never got to that point. I
Great.
did look at like plenty of Grandmaster games, but I don't know. I
Excellent.
didn't really get to the step beyond that.
Perfect. And that's amazing, actually, because 6 weeks ago when I proposed this to you, you were in a rush to get to the variations. You're like, I don't know if I can wait like 6 weeks, you know? And the other students in the group class said, you know, if I'd banned you from looking at variations, then it would have been the end of our understanding.
Yeah, for sure.
And okay, now things are at least going well enough that you didn't feel the need to pounce on, you know, opening variations or database lines or things like that. Let's see what
what I at least realized was that it just doesn't help me like get a better understanding to see a variation.
Mm-hmm.
Like it only leads to me memorizing the first 5 moves or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know why I play like whatever, like the pawn push or so.
Yeah. And it's very important, you know, from the very first move for us to understand the reason behind our moves. That way, if they work or don't work, we get some kind of feedback on why they did or didn't work. And we're constantly refining our understanding of chess principles. If we play this move thinking that, you know, it's great to let our pieces out, and then we've got some game where, you know, it doesn't work out, then we have to understand what was the opponent's idea. Oh, they were trying to counterattack our pawn on e4 immediately because it's an undefended pawn, and when we defended it, they played d5, and you know, suddenly we couldn't really get our bishop out, and they had a good position in the center, and they're threatening our pawn again, and you know, if we trade, we don't have a very nice position, etc. So we have to have some idea what our ideas are. Then when the opponent makes moves, we have to figure out what the ideas are behind their moves, and then based on the result. And the result isn't just win or lose. The result is, do I have a good position at move 5? Do I have a good position at move 10? Do I have a good position at move 20? Based on those kind of results, we start to refine our ideas of how these different you know, principles play against each other. In some positions, it's more important to take a pawn. In another position, it's more important to develop quickly. In another position, it's more important to trade a bishop for a knight and then outmaneuver the opponent with knights. So all those different things, we have to know what the ideas are, and slowly through experience start to figure out in which situations which ideas work better. And eventually we have much more refined ideas rather than just like, you should develop quickly. We have an idea like, in a position without any pawns in the center, if you can castle first and get a rook onto the open file with the opponent's king, you can use that to start tying up their pieces to blocking that file and create an advantage. So that's more specific than developing, and it describes the situation in which you want to do the developing, and it doesn't tell you that in that position, oh, you know, just play knight a3 as quickly as possible to get a piece off the back rank. You know, it's specifically saying, hey, let's put our rook on the open file, you know, put pressure on a bishop that's blocking on e7, and the king won't be able to castle away anymore without losing the bishop. So as the idea becomes more specific, it's a better and better idea. And we have to know what our ideas are and our opponent's ideas are, so that when we smash them together, we start to figure out in which situation which idea is stronger than the other.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry for interrupting you for 1 second, but can you share the screen in Zoom? So I don't have to watch the stream? Maybe.
Oh, yeah, I can. Actually, can you go into live chess and I'll invite you to my board? Because if I screen share in Zoom, which is what I've been doing for so long, when I screen share in Zoom, it's going to mess up all the cameras and also sometimes my computer.
Okay. So I should be in live chess.
Okay. I'll try inviting you to this board. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so that should work perfectly. So e4. Okay. And so that you know what I was talking about, my first variation was something really stupid like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, really stupid compared to what, a grandmaster knows. But I think for somebody who's just starting out at understanding openings, whether that player is 800, 1200, or 1800 when they first start actually understanding the reasonings behind moves, this variation here is still instructive, right? I mean, it shows that, white didn't figure out what to do about the fact that the pawn was undefended, and there wasn't something that they understood about the move e4. I have a whole long video about the differences between d4 and e4. And there's a huge difference between these two moves. And if you're playing e4 and not aware that one of the downsides of your move is that you're placing a pawn on an undefended square here, that's a tactical element, but it's a downside because threats are one of the guiding principles of every phase of chess, right? Like in the opening, there's main principles are develop your pieces, fight for the center, and threats. And threats means both, using threats against your opponent and respecting threats from your opponent. So, if I can use this undefended piece to develop a piece for free and my opponent plays a move like this, then I'm very happy as black to play like this. So, okay, so let's see what you understand about the Ruy Lopez.
Okay.
So e4, can you give me a quick Falk explanation of why you would play this move?
I mean, it was kind of like given to me.
Right, sure.
But, I mean, I honestly have not thought about why I would play e4.
Okay.
It makes sense. You grab space in the center, you open up your light square bishop, and yeah, that's what I would say is mainly the reason for it.
Great. Fair enough. Yeah. It lets out the light squared bishop. It lets out the queen. So it's increasing the value of each of these pieces, right? And it's putting a pawn in the center, which is helping you to control this.
Yeah.
The other thing that every pawn in the center does, Falk, is it protects your knights from being pushed away by the opponent's pawns.
Oh, okay.
Because like if you look in this position here, knight f6 is an extremely desirable move. Except for
e5, yeah.
except for this.
So okay. Yeah.
Right? So when you play e4 and let's say your opponent plays e5, you now play the exact same move of the Aljechin's defense, knight f3. But your opponent can't play e4.
Okay, makes sense, yeah.
So what e4 did was it partially secured this square for your knight. If you look at the starting position, the knights are incredibly good on f3 and c3 in the opening. Incredibly good. And I've got nothing really against knight a3 or knight d2. Honestly, those squares aren't that bad. But it's that these squares are so good in so many cases so early that you see the knights generally being placed on these squares. These squares are so good, but with every square in chess, you have to ask yourself, is the piece useful there? Is the piece flexible there? And is the piece secure there? There's 3 criteria for judging whether a piece is on a good square, right? So knights on f3 and c3, they do a lot. And they're flexible. So that's a great start, right? They could easily switch to other areas or other jobs. That's 2 big strengths for them. But any knight like this, every square you have to ask yourself if your opponent can just come after that piece.
Okay.
And chase it away with pawns. Because if so, then you don't have a secure square to work with. So in the opening, when you play a move like f4, that move is protecting the knight from both pawn pushes. Right? So it's really staking out that square for your knight. Same with c4, staking out that square for your knight. A move like e4 or d4 is going to protect either knight from the center pawns, right? We're stopping black from playing d5, d4, and we're stopping black from playing e5, e4. But we're not preventing b5, b4 like in the Najdorf that you play sometimes, right? Or some other Sicilians. And you're not stopping g5, g4, which is rarer, but it does come up in some openings.
Yeah.
So just something to keep in mind. So that's the one other thing that e4 does. Other than that, you nailed it. So black plays e5, and can you tell us why knight f3 would be good?
It develops a piece. It gets us to castle a move quicker. It attacks his pawn. That's about it, I guess.
Okay, one more thing. It's not just attacking their pawn, but it's sort of controlling 2 important squares in the center. So it may help you play the move d4 as well. And if you want to develop your bishops, it's often really good to develop them by playing e4 or d4 in one move. That's sort of semi-ideal. And if your opponent were just like putzing around like this or whatever, right? Then you get to play what people sometimes call classical development, but also it's just kind of like ideal, right? That you just make room for the bishops while taking control of the center at the same time. No wasted time there. Okay, black plays knight c6. And what's black's idea here?
Well, black also has to defend the pawn, and he also wants to put more pressure on the center.
Right, he respects your threat.
One move, so
he counters your control over the center, and he develops. Any difference between knight c6 and knight f3? They're almost mirror moves, but is there any difference between the two?
Yeah, he will take a move longer to castle shorter, I guess.
Yeah, right. He's one move closer to castling queenside. White's one move closer to castling kingside compared to each other. Yeah, super. All right. Now, in this position, you've been playing bishop b5 basically every game for a few weeks now?
Yeah, exclusively.
Yeah. So you haven't tried bishop d3 or? I don't know.
No, not at all.
Cool. All right, bishop b5. Do you like this move so far?
I mean, I haven't tried another move, so I can't really compare it, but I think I like the close positions I sometimes get in the Ruy Lopez. What I don't like is like when some, like in some of my games, black manages to like control all of the queenside space and like he keeps me out, and it's like very cramped for white, which is not something I would want to have, right? Because I kind of want to be the driving force, but yeah, it's sometimes when I get those positions, I'm a bit more uncomfortable.
So sometimes a6, b5, and then a later c5 plan, and
exactly.
You don't really understand why you're letting black have that much space, or how they got it, or how to fight against it, or
yeah. I kind of know the moves I kind of like have to play, I guess. Like I still play a4.
Right, you can figure out some of the moves you have to play, but you're not fully comfortable with everything that's happening. That makes a lot of sense. Cool. Okay. Now, I mean, if I had you like trying out this opening here, you would have probably, after several games, decided it was pretty unsatisfactory. So, yeah, I mean, every opening, even good ones, has like, you know, things that don't work out or things that you have to figure out or whatever. So it's normal that there's some things that don't always work for you with this move, but it hasn't been like so bad that you're like, why am I putting my bishop here?
No, I'm kind of comfortable with this move.
Okay, cool. Now, can you tell us what are the ideas behind this move?
I mean, it kind of creates a threat of me taking his knight, and then I can take his pawn. That's like the main idea, I guess, and then it allows me to castle. That's like since it develops the piece, and it creates like long-term pressure because usually in like all of the games they play a6 and then you go back to a4 and you reroute the bishop. So I mean, it looks like you want to have the bishop on b5, but in reality you always get it to to the a2 g8 diagonal, right?
Have you ever tried the lines where you just trade?
No.
Okay. Because in reality, you don't have to always bring it back to like this a2 diagonal. That's one of white's choices, but not actually the only choice.
Yeah, I either like put it on b3 or c2, the light square bishop eventually, but I never trade. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So as Falk says, it allows white to castle quite quickly. He says it sort of introduces the threat of taking here and taking here, but as Falk already knows, white's not actually winning a pawn by doing this because Falk's opponents probably often play a6 against him, and if bishop takes knight were a threat, then you would play it, right?
Yeah, but he has the queen move, so
it's not quite a threat because of queen d4 and queen g5, which win back the pawn. So we could say it's sort of introducing the idea that at some point white might be able to win this pawn. Basically, once white's castled, it will become a threat. Yeah. So we're preparing a threat, And by putting pressure against this knight, we're both trying to win this pawn and maybe trying to play d4. Different ways of doing it. Also, some people might think the threat is to give the opponent doubled pawns, not to win a pawn, right? Some people, depending on how they value bishops and knights and doubled pawns, some people may think that bishop takes knight is a threat just positionally.
Okay.
Right? So, I mean, again, people are going to have different values on that, right? And that's where ideas are going to clash, right? Like, you may be playing this for white for a long time, and then one day you play it as black against somebody, you play a6, and instead of bishop a4, they take. And then after the game, you're like, why did you do that? I always keep my bishop. I like bishops better than knights. And they say, well, I like knights better than bishops. And you're like, whoa, different idea, right? Or they might say, I agree with you, bishops are better than knights, but these doubled pawns are really nasty. Like, I think it's really hard for black to play the game with doubled pawns from this early on. So it could be like different ideas for why they do it, but they can tell you their idea and you're like, whoa, somebody's got a different idea on how to play this opening. And so that's one of the reasons why, like, when we did the opening of the week, and I know, folks, it's been a few weeks since we've done an opening of the week, but when we do opening of the week, people practice the same opening with white and black against each other, but it doesn't mean they get the same game every time, right? Each person has a different interpretation of what's valuable in any position. They have different values as to whether they want to like castle faster or preserve a pawn structure or whatever it may be. And so if you played, Rui Lopez's opening of the week, you would get, 100 different approaches. So, okay, but you prefer to play bishop a4. And we can say that this shows us that that Falk likes bishops better than knights. Probably.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
Maybe not particularly, but I mean, I just like the positions you get with like. It's nice to have like the bishop supporting the attack on the king side. So I wouldn't say I prefer either piece over the other, but it's just in this opening, when you played it, it feels nicer to, like in some lines, have like the bishop cover e4, right? Or when you push and attack the king side, it's nice to have the supporting piece.
But the first time you had this position here, Falk, the first time in your life that you had this position, you didn't yet have like tons of ideas of what the game was going to look like in 20 moves. Like now some ideas of like, oh, this is what this kind of a plan looks like, and this is the job that a bishop on c2 might do one day. But the first time you had this position, I don't think you had that much of that knowledge before because you were pretty exclusively a d4 player.
I think the issue is I saw too many games just by watching streams or whatever.
You'd already seen like enough games that you just knew bishop a4 is what people play.
Yeah. It's like the same with the knight off, like or the Sicilian setup I go with, the English attack, right? I've seen it so many times, I just know the setup, and it felt like comfortable to play it.
Okay. Well, it's very important to re-examine everything. So when you play bishop a4, it should be your choice. Never just something you've seen. And if you have seen it before and bishop a4 is right, it may feel a little bit weird to like think about it, right? It's like doing a puzzle in a puzzle book when you accidentally saw the answer already when you were checking the previous puzzle, right? Like you were checking puzzle 11 and accidentally you saw puzzle 12 says rook d6 exclam and you're like, ugh, what do I do now? How do I do puzzle 12, right? Do I skip it and come back in 2 years or how do I try to think about puzzle 12? I know it's awkward. You know that like 99 out of 100 grandmasters played bishop a4 in some position, and so you just want to play it and get on with it. But it really does have to be your own move. So your opponent's threatening your bishop, and you really have to think for yourself what the value is between these two moves. Otherwise it'll never be your move. And every move you make should be your move, even if someone else played it before.
Yeah, makes sense.
And same thing I said about how, different people may have different reasons for taking on c6, or some people may take and some people may retreat, etc. Even if you're playing the same move as me, it will eventually be your move and not my move. You'll be playing it for a slightly different reason than I play it as you get to know it. Like eventually every move becomes yours, even if someone else has done it. And so, why don't you do that right now? Why don't you think between bishop takes knight and bishop a4 and figure out which move you think is or what you think the pluses or minuses of the moves are if you don't know. And
So I think
yeah,
So I think I'm at the point where bishop a4 has become my move, if that
Right.
makes sense. Like
Yeah.
at first it may not have been, but now, right now it's like the one I'm comfortable with, and where it's like the one I would fall back to.
right. You've got ideas
can-
for all the things you can do with the bishop already in your
Exactly.
head now.
And I mean, I can also understand why you would take, because even at my rating, like it doesn't really matter if people have bishops over knights, right? Mm-hmm. Because they might still, like most of my games are still decided by like blunders of pieces hanging in like some bit more advanced tactical variation.
Exactly, yeah.
But I mean, I don't know. It also feels a bit unnecessary for me to take here, because why just give up the bishop for? I mean, even those double pawns don't really feel like this big of a weakness, because it's like a very solid formation still. Like,
Yeah.
for example, what you sometimes have in the Caro-Kann, where you have like the double pawns on the f file, right? It's also like it's not that big of an advantage at times, but
Right. I think you're thinking of this variation here,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. And these pawns are not weak.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's kind of the opposite, just on the queen side in a way for me.
You may have never
So I
heard
was
this
thinking
concept before, but doubled pawns have two different kinds of weakness. Actually, it's unlikely you've heard this because I've never seen this in any textbook. But
Yeah,
there's
never heard of it.
offensive weakness or defensive weakness for doubled pawns. So if they're defensively weak, it means like you can attack them. But sometimes
Okay.
doubled pawns are not defensively weak. It's like white's plan is not to go attack black at f7, f6 in
Yeah, for
this
sure.
opening, right? In fact, it's an extra pawn for black on the king side, and you have a hard time attacking into them. So these pawns are not defensively weak, but these pawns are offensively weak. By being doubled, they struggle to attack white with black's pawn majority in the way in which white could, make use of their pawn majority. Okay, so there's offensive or defensive weakness. These pawns indeed lack defensive weakness, but they have offensive weakness, and the same is true potentially. I mean, you can, agree or disagree or whatever, but the same is potentially true about white taking on c6 and black taking back. This pawn structure is not weak to getting attacked, but it's weaker for doing stuff itself against white.
Yeah, I agree. It like I don't know. It doesn't even look unpleasant for black, to be honest. But yeah.
Okay, so there's basically two options when you want to try and make bishop a4 your own, even though you know it's what GMs play, right? One is you actually think for yourself about bishop takes knight, bishop a4. You think over that decision. The other option is you just try playing it a couple of times and just see what it gives you, Like, and if it's a really stupid move like bishop takes a6, it won't take many games till you realize like, oh, this move's really bad. I'm gonna go back to playing bishop a4, right? Like, yeah, that's only gonna take one game. But depending how good or bad bishop takes c6 is, playing it a few times will illuminate to you whether or not you like it or not.
Yeah, it sounds like a good idea.
So that's like another alternative you can do if there's some move that where there seems to be a choice and you're not sure why the choice is made. So bishop a4 will play knight f6 for black, and
now I just castle.
now you castle, yeah.
It's also kind of funny. Like I know castling is a move, but I kind of forgot why. I mean, I think the idea that he can't take my e4 pawn was because of rook e1 now.
Black can take your e4 pawn actually.
Okay, I mean, it's something I haven't encountered in a game, right? And I didn't really think about now. But I just know castling is like the move to play here. But I wouldn't know the refutation
of knight takes e4.
Opponent. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So in a sense, I imagine you could explain to me why you castle. Like you're developing, you're preparing to put the rook on e1, you're starting to threaten bishop c6, knight e5.
Yeah.
Like also, what else are you going to do?
Exactly.
So you could explain the move, but you don't know exactly why knight e4 doesn't work. And actually, I mean, that's quite an interesting question. And that would be like another level of like understanding the move. It's like, okay, the opponent's threatening to take your center pawn. You're ignoring it. Are you ignoring it because you've seen it ignored, or because you assume that, you know, something with rook e1 and it'll be okay? Right? So there's a question of whether you just saw people do it and trust them, or whether you actually in your own mind have the positional instincts that knight takes e4 isn't going to work. Like if you were black in a position like this, you would say like, no way I'm touching that pawn.
I think in this case it's a bit of both, because I don't know, like let's say he takes, it just looks so wrong because now we have rook e1 maybe, and we can take his knight, and maybe his e5 pawn is hanging. Right? Like, I don't know.
Right. So there could be something here, and most likely we'll win back the e5 pawn, right?
Yeah.
But definitely we could say if all we're doing is winning back the e5 pawn, then that would be equal pawns, and we have to sort of think a little bit like who's getting a good position out of it, right? We'll have to add that to our consideration. Okay. Yeah, so you only have a few weeks of experience with double king pawns. Let's say black does play knight takes e4 against you today for the first time. You would consider rook e1. What else would you consider here? Is there any other option that comes to mind?
So, like, moves coming to mind, maybe d3. Maybe, I don't know, knight c3. Maybe that works. Maybe d5. But for, like, first, maybe we take on c6.
Okay, so I've drawn arrows for the 4 other moves I think you've suggested. So I think you're up to 5 candidate moves. You could play d3 kicking their knight. You could play knight c3 using the undefended knight to try and develop more quickly by making it, you know, trade or retreat or something. You could trade on c6 first if we're about to fight over the e5 pawn before black maybe plays b5 as well. So might as well consider that move. You could play d4 right away, which is very high on development, and looking to probably take the pawn on e5, and if black plays e takes d4, play rook e1 or something. And then we've got rook e1, which is, you know, the obvious move, putting the rook opposite the undefended knight, badly defended pawn, and king. So tactical element wise, you know, rook e1 should definitely win a pawn back. But as I said, it's not enough to be sure that our move wins a pawn back. We have to kind of maximize the position that we're going to get out of this. Because let me just play you like a really bland variation, right? I'll go here. I'm not going to try anything fancy for white. I'm just going to give you like a whatever variation, right? Just to give a sense. Check. Here, 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 right? You could imagine it's possible that this position be about equal.
Yeah, probably.
It's possible, right?
Better.
There may also be an advantage for white, but before we look into it too deeply, it's possible that the position's about equal. If the position were about equal, then black would have been very smart to take on e4, right? They knew that they take on e4, and then while white's playing rook e1 and whatever, they'll just get castled, and white will get the pawn back on e5, and what do they care? They get, you know, an exchange French or a Petrov kind of position, and whatever. So that's sort of showing us the importance of us kind of being a little bit precise with what we do here. So bishop takes c6, pawn to d3, pawn to d4, knight to c3, and rook e1. That's great, Falk. That's a very good list of candidate moves to try and figure out what to do. Do you have any instinct which of those moves are more or less likely to be good from that list?
Okay, so bishop takes c6 looks awful. I don't know, it's like, because we give up the bishop that's developed and has potential. Kicking the knight doesn't, with d3, looks okay, but it's not really doing that much because it doesn't challenge his center or do anything besides that, right? It's just kicking the knight and regaining control for, like, it's kind of like we are making up for a blunder which we may have not made, if that makes sense.
Okay.
By playing d3, like we kind of admit, oh yeah, we lost a pawn, and now we can just go back and, like, I don't know, fix this.
Just keep playing down a pawn.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Okay.
I don't know, d4 might work. Looks kind of okay, I think. but it's also a bit tactical. If I take to the knight and we take on e5, I don't know. We would have to calculate it a bit more. And rook e1 just makes the most sense, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Cool. So me having played, 10,000 double king pawns before you, I have like much stronger instincts of like, this is often right, this is occasionally right, this is never right, that kind of like list of moves, right? So d3 looks the wrongest to me because, well, we've given up a pawn and we need to use we need to do something aggressive, and just attacking your opponent's piece that's already undefended so it can just go back to a better square. That's not aggressive. Some people may think it's aggressive. You're attacking a piece. It's not aggressive. The piece just goes to a better square.
It's also giving up control of the center, right?
Yeah. This move was not aggressive enough. If you compare that to a move like rook e1 or d4, which are the two moves that I think are most likely to be right when I see a position like this, those moves are much more impactful. They're trying to win the pawn on e5 that can't move. They're trying to take advantage of this piece being undefended for our further operations, not just send it back to a defended square for the opponent. So my experience from looking through lots of these openings before is that d4 and rook e1 are most likely to be right. I also know that occasionally like b5, bishop b3 like keeps your bishop from fighting for e5. So we should consider this move here. And I know that the move knight c3 is usually a little speculative, but it can be played occasionally. But the idea on a move like this is very much like development focused, and often involves trying to play knight g5 quickly.
Yeah.
Like if they
does d6 here, I don't know.
If they now try to save this pawn by kicking our bishop away, right? Then definitely we're looking at like knight g5, queen d5 kind of stuff, even this early. So knight c3 crops up occasionally. It's rarely the best move, but I would say like if your opponent played knight c3 in a position like this and you were black instead of white, you have to somewhat respect this move, because you have to respect it at least to realize that that there's going to be some tactical ideas for white and some quick development from them.
Okay.
And if we simply retreat like this, then this was like a perfectly good developing move, although probably not better than rook e1 was.
Yeah, for sure.
But it may transpose to how good rook e1 was, right? And white may also be able to play a move like, d4 here or rook e1 here, and you may get similar positions that you would have otherwise. And takes here, something like that. Okay. So that's good. I'm confident you could find some way to get an okay position for white here. Let's see if you can get a good position for white. Why don't you try and play 3 or 4 moves as white here against me, and then we'll see if you got a good position.
So I guess rook e1 now.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe now d4 is okay, because it kind of like attacks the center. Your knight can't take it. We can also take on e5.
Yeah, you've got a few moves. You can take a minute or two per move if you want.
Okay.
I mean, this isn't like a serious test or anything. It's like casual, but you're also allowed to think a little bit if you want.
Okay, so I guess I just take on e5.
Okay.
Wait, maybe I take your knight first. Let me see. No, it's okay, I think.
Okay.
Oh, this looks annoying. Guess I just go back here. Okay, so I'm looking at knight f3, just going back, and that will lead to bishop g4, I guess. But other than that, is there another move? maybe I can take your knight first with my. Maybe I can take on c6. You take on f2. I go king h1. I don't know. I don't like this. Okay, I just go back and. Okay, I guess g4 seems like the only move. Okay, so what is the move here?
How do you like the position?
It's okay, I think, but maybe you also have like potential tactically. I would probably play bishop g5 here
Okay.
to develop the piece, and like at least I take your queen. She has to go somewhere else. Maybe I can pin her if she goes to like, I don't know, f5 or something.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I think you're doing pretty well for white here. With knight d2 and bishop c2, you might win a pawn while black's castling kingside. So I think you've done a pretty good job here of getting a good game.
Okay.
Yeah. So that works for me. Okay, so let's try another variation. Let's play b5 here.
Okay, so I always go back here, I guess.
Okay.
No, but
Sorry.
jump to. Okay.
And oh, sorry. It's going to sound really silly, but what's the principle behind bishop b3? Why does white play bishop b3?
I move out of the attack, like he's attacking my piece, so I move away because I don't gain any value by capturing, right?
Yeah.
I only lose.
Yep. That's it.
Okay.
That's the end, right? I just want to make the point because we often forget about the role of threats in like opening principles, right? But any talk about like, oh, the bishop's going to do this on this diagonal, or oh, I'm planning to play a4, something like that, that's all like extra nonsense, right? You've got one choice to not lose the bishop here. The opponent's threatening to trade a pawn for your bishop, and you save your bishop, right? So there's like there's three principles in the opening, really, or three main things that are operating, right? One is developing your pieces, one is controlling the center, and one is threats, right? So here we just respect a one-move threat with the only move that avoids it. Life goes on.
Yeah.
All right, I play bishop e7 for black. And
I always go rook e1 here.
Okay, and why?
First of all, to like prevent you from taking my pawn, I guess, now.
Okay.
And I develop my rook. It allows my knight to later go to f1 and like g3 or e3. And yeah, that's basically it. It improves my rook, right? Which is something I want to do anyway. And maybe I should also look at c3 here, so I avoid a knight trade. So I avoid like knight a5. But I usually just don't avoid it, I guess. Which is a bit
So should you or
unpleasant.
shouldn't you?
I guess I should play c3 to avoid this. Yeah.
Okay. It sounds like you need to
Probably.
clarify for yourself whether black's threatening knight a5 or knight e4 more in this position.
Yeah. Okay, so
That'll help you
I
know
just-
which one to prevent, depending on
Yeah,
which
sure.
is actually a threat.
so knight a5. Maybe I can even take on f7 because I win 2 pawns and take with check. And now I kind of regret that my rook is on e1 in a way,
Okay.
because I kind of would have preferred it like be on the f file, I guess.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't know. Maybe c3 is also sensible here. I haven't like decided,
All right.
fully decided, but yeah.
Well, let's check it against this move, right?
Okay, yeah, true. So earlier we tried rook e1, but maybe there's like a better move now. But okay. Well, I guess I can play d3 and then take on e5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, now rook has to go to c2. Oh, but then you have like e4 maybe? I don't know. Oh yeah, if I take on e5, you have to take with a knight, because otherwise your knight is hanging, so I can then take the rook. Or maybe play even... never mind.
Yeah.
And queen takes, and probably it's okay.
Yeah. So how do you feel?
Honestly, I kind of like Black's position. Like his
Same.
bishops are solid. Like, I don't know, it's not that great.
Yeah. So that didn't work out that well for white. Let's see what else we can do. We're here. Rook e1, d5, d3. That didn't feel good to me.
Mm-hmm.
That knight c5 tempo where either you give up the bishop pair or you risk not winning your pawn back on e5. Even if you did win the pawn back on e5, it's like, what? Maybe you're getting an equal position. It doesn't feel like white's playing for any kind of advantage.
So maybe queen e2,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
kind of like a similar idea, but maybe
Right.
the queen is more like
See if the
flexible, I
queen will
guess.
have some other impact.
Yeah.
So again, you're kind of at d3 here, right? There's
Yeah,
not
d3
really anything
didn't
else
work out
obvious to
with-
do.
Yeah.
The only other move you can throw in these lines is a4. Nothing else you do makes a threat like big enough to be considered.
Yeah.
Like you can't play, h3 or knight a3 or anything like that. You could include a4 rook b8 or a4 bishop b7 or a4 b4 and then try any of these other things you're trying and see if it improves things, but it's going to improve them probably not like dramatically, although we could look into it more. But okay, here you're going to look at d3 again. And
Yeah.
black's going to try knight c5 again. And again, you're probably curious about your pawn. So you try taking it. They take, queen takes, knight b3. Here you could calculate queen
Maybe rook
g7.
e1. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
If you go rook e1, you're not threatening anything. The knight can just
true. I
run
was-
away.
yeah.
You could consider queen g7, but I'll save you some time. Once you calculate bishop f6, you'll see that whatever fancy moves you play, you end up losing the whole rook in the corner now.
Okay.
So you'll reject that once you've calculated for a minute. And so after knight b3, you'll revert to just taking it, right? Now there's only one good move for black, but it's castling to defend this pawn and get out of the way of rook e1 before rook e1 happens.
Yeah.
Now we can see that black is again going to develop the bishops without any trouble, and if anybody has the advantage here, it's black, not white.
Yeah, for sure.
So queen e2 didn't achieve anything for us. It was different than rook e1. It was worth looking at. The whole queen on e5 just changed the tactics. So it's worth checking for sure. That's exactly how you want to investigate these things. But it didn't lead to an advantage for white. Anything else, or are you getting the idea that c3 is not so good here?
D3 first, but
Yeah.
it doesn't really look like it's achieving that much.
Right.
And now like rook e1 again, and
Yeah.
d6. I don't know.
We could play d6 also. Let's just say black can do this, 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 and just not care about what you've done, right? Black's position is great.
It's fine. Yeah.
So
yeah, c3 is not it, I guess.
right. Now you're supposed to log somewhere in your head that these knight takes e4 moves, the move c3 really doesn't help you against them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because c3 is to play a supported d4, but in these variations where everything explodes, you don't need c3. You can play d4 anyway. You also might want to play knight c3 in these sort of more aggressive variations.
Yeah.
So c3, taking away this square from your knight, knight e4 is a very simple refutation from black. And the refutation may just be that black gets equality, but it's a refutation idea-wise. Like, knight takes e4 beats c3.
Okay.
We can't do this. So that's the end of c3, and now that's telling us that we had to worry about knight e4 a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We don't necessarily have to defend e4, but we have to play a move where if the opponent plays knight takes e4, we'll have something good. So that could be e4, d4, that could be a4. It's got to be something pretty impactful.
Yeah.
Or I mean, something that does something for your development. So king h1 and h3 and a3, none of those moves are likely to be amazing for white after knight takes e4. They'll be a little better than c3 because they won't stop knight c3, but they're not going to be amazing to just waste a move, nor do you really want to waste a move. So, what should white do here?
I guess rook e1, maybe d3. Yeah, as you said, maybe that's probably it. Maybe knight c3, but it looks kind of unpleasant, I guess, because of b4.
Okay. Now let's check your rook e1 again against knight a5. Is there anything good that white can do against knight a5, right? Because this is what you were worried about.
Yeah.
With rook e1, which you always used to play.
So I guess there must be a good reason why. So we take the pawn, I guess, first on e5. Knight takes e5.
Yeah.
Maybe. And I guess we just are up the pawn right now so it's worth it in the end.
Exactly. A center pawn is worth more than the difference between the knight and the bishop. And in addition to the knight versus bishop, white gets a file. So there's a little compensation to begin with. The knight a5 threat is really, really small in this position here. I know I mentioned it to you as sort of like a threat at some point in the Ruy Lopez, but it's a very small threat.
Yeah.
Black's trying to win 5/100ths of a pawn with knight a5, basically. Like the bishop's worth maybe 0.1, 0.15 more. I would say 0.15 more than the knight, so that seems like quite a bit. But the open file you're giving white is worth like 1/10 of a pawn. So, so you're not gaining much with that knight a5 kind of move. Okay, so it's a very mild threat, but it's also only a threat that crops up once this pawn's defended. So you can play rook e1 here. In fact, you can play any move that stops knight e4. That's black's only real threat here. So if we're respecting threats from black, we have to play a move which is either a developing move defending e4 or a developing move that creates a threat as big as the threat on e4. So a developing move that has a pawn-sized threat. Do you see any developing move with a pawn-sized threat here for white?
I don't know, knight g5, but you can kick it, I guess.
Not a developing move. Your knight's already developed.
So d3?
d3 doesn't make a threat. A move of yours that makes a threat.
Oh, okay.
D3 is the first category of moves, right? Developing moves that deal with your opponent's threat, right? And for that, you've listed rook e1, d3, and knight c3 before. Okay. That's correct. That's 3 out of 4 of the moves that fit that.
Another move that's like.
But a move that instead of defending threatens a pawn, and is also a developmental move. You've got 2 moves in that category. You've got a total of 6 candidate moves here for white.
Oh, really? So a4 maybe?
a4 is one of them. That develops your rook and makes a pawn-sized threat. So your
C5,
opponent's
but that's like
your opponent's got a 1-pawn threat, right?
Oh yeah, D4. Sorry.
They've got a 1-pawn threat, so your counter threat should be worth, a pawn, probably.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got A4. Perfect. It threatens a pawn and develops the rook. And the second one?
I guess D4.
D4. It develops your bishop and queen, and it threatens a pawn.
Yeah.
So that's 2 more candidate moves, okay? Now the moves that defend this and develop. You've got knight C3, D3, and rook E1. There's 1 move missing.
Queen E2.
Queen E2. Oh. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you found all 6 moves that I would look at in this position if I were trying to figure out what's the best move for white.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, Falk, I don't know what the best move for white is in this Ruy Lopez position. I know that many grandmasters have played rook E1, hundreds of times over the years, but I don't know that they're right.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know that A4 or D4 or C3 or knight C3 or queen E2 is not better. I know that there's like a major line with queen E2 that involves putting the rook on D1 and then same C3 D4. But basically, can you understand the principle why white might want to try that?
Oh, definitely. Like in most of my games, I try to get my queen to E2 eventually because I couldn't tell you exactly why, but she's always uncomfortable on D1 for some reason. I don't know why, but it's something I noticed in a lot of games. Like she just is better on E2 to either like support, like, I don't know, to connect the rooks or whatever. But she's...
So the queen wants a square normally in chess like C2, D2, or E2. It's a typical square a queen would want. In this opening here, your bishop often needs C2, so that's why you almost never see the queen come to C2.
Yeah.
And D2, there's often like a logjam of this knight and bishop, so that's why she doesn't go to D2 very often, right?
Yeah.
So that leaves kind of like E2. And honestly, the queen's just a little bit like awkward in this opening. She's just slightly in the way of your other pieces, and she doesn't do too much. And most often in the Ruy Lopez, you'll see the queen on D1 and bishop on C1 for like long numbers of moves.
Yeah, for sure.
In a way that makes me very uncomfortable. One of the reasons I struggle to play the Ruy Lopez as white is because it makes me uncomfortable that I can't find squares for those 2 pieces, and I just don't know what to do. And I used to always play like bishop G5 at the wrong time when I was trying to learn this opening. And I was studying with a buddy who was like, also learning the Ruy Lopez, but he was like, quite good at it, or, relatively quite good at it. And every time I played bishop G5, he'd be like, no, that's bad. If black plays H6, you don't want to trade, you don't want to retreat. Like, just stop trying to develop your pieces. Right? And I was like, you won't let me develop my pieces. Like, I don't want to play this opening where I'm not allowed to develop my pieces. So that was like a real like stumbling block for me. And it's also a little bit awkward for the queen. So the idea of queen E2, rook D1 would just be that, your rook's better placed for playing D4 than like your queen might be. If you think it's more likely your D pawn is going to trade than your E pawn, then the rook on E1 might not be that good. Right? We're looking for a good development for the rook. The queen might be happy to just sit somewhere in the back row and defend a pawn meanwhile and sort of like wait for something to open up. But the rook might like to be on a file where it gives some pressure. Okay. So just looking at this position and without having played it 1,000 times and without a lot of experience, like, I would be shocked if you or anybody else who's watching in chat right now could explain to me why rook E1 must be better than queen E2. I would be shocked if anyone can give like a good, coherent idea argument that will convince us that rook E1 is correct. Now, probably everybody here plays rook E1 because they've seen it in GM games, right? But honestly, they should be playing queen E2 half the time if they can't tell which one's better.
Yeah, for sure.
Why just play rook E1 100 times if you don't know which move is better? And then your knight C3 move looks interesting. This A4 move I've just suggested is interesting. Some people like playing D3 and then D4. Now this move here, I'm afraid might be associated with white losing a bishop to this C5, C4 trap. This might be one move that's not that good, but I'm not sure. Basically, the possible problem with this move is that after black takes, takes, you can't take with your queen because c5 wins
Oh yeah.
a piece.
That's
But,
fine.
if white throws in e5 here, I have no idea what happens. That looks basically winning for white. So I'm not sure of the tactics around this. I would have to sit here and calculate for a bit.
Yeah.
Because it looks like to me this knight has nowhere to move, and if it moves, queen f3 would attack f7 and a8. So I'm not sure like how black is like so clever with c5 c4. It looks like they've lost the game. So I've got this suspicion that d4 somehow fails. But I'm not just going to assume that d4 fails until I've been able to calculate it myself, right? Kind of like what we talked about with knight takes e4 in an earlier position where you thought it would probably fail. And I can tell you that actually it's a major variation for black in this position here. Knight takes e4 gets played. You found a way to get a perfectly nice position for white. But this move does get played, even by GMs. It's just called the open defense to the Ruy Lopez, as opposed to the closed defenses are, black plays like d6 and white plays, c3 d3 or c3 d4 or something like that, right? But it's considered a defense, and there are ways for black to, obviously white wins back their pawn, as you kind of expected. White wins back their pawn, but black can sort of get developed. They don't get their king stuck in the center. They're able to castle, and white maybe get some small advantage. And, GMs have been playing this forever. Anand played it in the World Championship against Kasparov. Like it's like a top tier opening option, right? It's absolutely
Must be decent then, right?
absolutely nothing that's obviously wrong with doing that. In that same way, before I'm going to say that d4 isn't a move, I'm going to have to calculate it for myself, not just say like, I don't remember seeing many GM games with d4 here, and I'm afraid of the Noah's Ark trap. I'm going to try and actually calculate it to add to my knowledge of when I can or can't play d4, right?
So let's say I'm preparing this, I don't know, I played a game and I want to look at this exact line, right? If I maybe I look at d4, would you still, I know you don't recommend the engine, but would you still recommend an opening book to compare to first of all to see what people have played, right? And then to compare it with that.
At your level, I think it's a pretty good calculation exercise, honestly. To just sit down and calculate d4 for a little bit and see, sort of how good or bad it seems to you, right? d4, and black can take with the pawn or they can take with the knight. So it's two branches right away. I would recommend at your level that you try and solve it yourself. And again, I would say, anybody who's going to try and go find the answer in a database or by turning on an engine for a moment or something like that, they'll get one answer to this position that they won't be able to apply to other positions, right? Because let's say I play rook e1 and black castles, and now I want to know if d4 is good or not. If you've done a calculation exercise, you know how to try and figure out the next answer. That other person has no idea. They're like, I turn on my computer again. And then every single position that ever comes up in their lives when they're playing chess, they'll be like, can I turn on the computer to find the answer? Oh, no, I'm in a tournament right now. I guess I have no idea what to do. I'll make a random move.
Yeah.
Great.
That's what you mean.
So this d4 idea, it's very thematic in every e4, e5 opening. So if you can't calculate whether d4 is a good or bad move, then why are you even playing e4, e5 openings, right? Well, I understand some people just don't have that calculation ability yet, and they're just playing it because it's an opening, right? And they're working on it. And if you were 400 points weaker, Falk, I would tell you play the move d4 and find out. You know what I mean? I would never tell somebody who can calculate 2 moves ahead to spend half an hour trying to calculate 5 moves ahead, because they can't. So why? But my answer to that player rated 1,000 is not going to be, turn on the computer to find out whether or not d4 loses a piece. That's not going to be my answer to them either, right? So what am I going to tell somebody who's incapable of solving that question for themselves? I'm going to tell them, try it out and learn from experience.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And for you, I would say, do it as an exercise. See if you can find the answer. You've got probably an 85% chance of figuring it out for yourself in 20 minutes.
So would you also recommend, let's say I have like this list of openings I want to play right now, right? Or or that I am playing right now. Should I play should I create like an opening file and
you can create
lines and
you can create somewhere where you save lines that you play and mark which lines you like and which ones you don't like. You can totally do that. Yeah, you can start building up something based on your experience and also the games you've seen, right? Like you can say, I saw a great game that looks like this. Another thing that I like to do, again, it's an option. It's not like you have to do it. But another thing I like to do is like pick out when I see like a really great game. Because like let's say you've played through, I don't know what, 20 Grandmaster games in this opening?
Oh, like 100.
Or 100. Okay. Let's say you've played through 100 games. At least. Yeah. Let's say out of those 100 games, a few of them stood out to you.
Yeah, I have a few, I think.
Then what I do is I take, let's say out of every 100 games, I might pick 3 to 5 games that I think are really like awesome. They're like games that I might want to play through a second time, or games that if a friend of mine asks, how do you play the Ruy Lopez? I might just send them the game like, hey, just play through this game. It'll give you an idea.
Yeah.
So I would just clip a few of those games, and you can keep on the one hand, you can keep variations of yours if you want. On the other hand, you could keep like a list of like instructive games. And ultimately, you can also keep like a list of your own games that you've played in that opening. So you could have, here are all the games I've played in the Ruy Lopez, and in each game you mark at move 10 if you think you had a good position or not. Something like that is like a great reference in case you forget some of that stuff. When you click through it, it'll quickly come back to you. You'd be like, oh yeah, I played this game, and yeah, I thought it was a good position for white.
Yeah, I've been doing something like similar. Like I download all my games and like put them in my ChessBase database, right? Mm-hmm. And like for example, the book I'm reading right now, I'm still reading the Soviet Chess Primer. Whenever I find like a puzzle or technique I just keep it and put it in a file. It's really convenient. Yeah. But yeah.
So we've got, a collection of variations that you've experienced. Mm-hmm. We've got a collection of model games, right? Best games from GMs that you've noticed. And then we've got kind of like your model games, or kind of like, which are kind of not quite models, but they also are like lessons that will trigger your memory in a different way and, really be personal for you. You'll be able to work with them well. So those are all good tools you can use, right?
Yeah.
And, right here, I just want to talk about D4 again for 1 second. So we've talked about how there are different principles, right? Like, and reading like, oh, is there pressure on C6? Is there pressure on E5? Who's going to try and take over the center, et cetera? You've probably seen that in a lot of Ruy Lopez games, people play C3, D4, right? You've probably also seen that some people just play D3 and maneuver their pieces without changing the center.
Yes.
So there are principles that tell us what moves to play. There are also certain like typical moves that we have to be accustomed to thinking about, right? So the possibility of the knight trading for our bishop might be a positional decision we have to think about, right? Or the possibility, let me play D6 for black. Let's say the possibility of trading rooks on A8. We may have some sense like when that's good for white, when that's good for black. Similarly, there are certain like typical moves. They're not exactly principles, but there are certain typical moves that always have to be taken into account. So there are positional ideas we are considering, and then there's just like specific moves we look at. And D4, under any circumstance, is like a move to consider in every E4, E5 opening. So basically, we can start on move 2. That's where it starts. As soon as we're in an E4, E5 opening, we can think about how good or bad is D4, right? And everyone's going to have their own opinion about it. We know that, knight C6 is potentially the downside to this move. We may know there's a limited number of good squares to move the queen to, like queen D5, knight F6 is going to be bad. Queen C3, bishop B4 will be slightly worse. And, basically only queen A4 and queen to E3. You may or may not know this already, and I don't want to just like dump moves on you that aren't your own moves. But, at some point it's like, okay, there's 2 moves that are plausible for white, and we each form our own opinion about whether this line was good or bad for white. Like, we lost a tempo to the knight, but we were white. So, it's not like we're super far behind in development. And we eliminated the opponent's center pawn, and we're left with E4 versus D6 probably. Is that worth it or not? I mean, everybody has to form their own opinion about it, but how many people try playing d4 on move 2? Like, nobody, right? But I would recommend that people try all these openings. That's how they learn stuff, right? But anyway, we have to like have some opinion about d4 on move 2. Was this a good or bad position, right? And then similarly, if we play knight f3 and the opponent plays knight c6, we have to have some opinion about d4 in this position, right? Is d4 any good here? Okay, good question. Bishop b5, a6. Here we don't need an opinion about d4 because of the principle of threats. But you could have an opinion about bishop takes knight followed by d4.
Yeah, I think that's at least something I like try to learn when I swapped to e4, because when I used to play d4, I didn't have any ideas, right? Like,
yeah,
the only reason I was playing d4 was because I probably watched like 50 YouTube videos on like d4 openings in a sense.
Yeah,
and I knew like the openings I was supposed to play according to those videos.
Right.
I didn't have any ideas, or like before d4 I used to play the London system.
Yeah.
And I mean, I didn't think about my moves, right? I just played the first whatever 10
like so many other players. Yeah.
And
I mean, we've got an army of zombies out there.
Yeah, for sure.
And we're chipping away at them over on this channel. So, you know, in this position, it could be an interesting question. What happens if we trade on c6 and play d4? I mean, it's like the goal of this opening, e4, e5, knight f3. The goal is to play d4.
Yeah.
And you can see that when white plays knight f3. Like, you said all the things that were good about it, right? And one of the things was that it controls d4. But if you ask yourself, like, why is knight f3 better than bishop c4 or knight c3 or f4 or whatever, and it may or may not be better than them, but like, why are we choosing knight f3? You have to understand, somebody playing knight f3, their intention is to play d4. Like, that's like very high up there on the list, on white's to-do list, is play d4. So every move, you know, knight f6 gets played by black. Okay, yeah, normally people castle here, but we're going to ask ourselves, what about d4? Mm-hmm. And there are always standard moves, even beyond that move, that you're going to get good at calculating d4, because you're going to know that on d4, they could take your pawn, they could trade, they could play d6. And that's like what you calculate each time, right? What else would you do, right? But once you've made that candidate list of 3 responses to d4 for yourself, 4. There's always knight takes as well. We got to remember that. Once you've made that list of candidate moves, it'll come back to you again and again, right? Just like I asked you, you know, for white, in some position where you decide this is threatened, what are the candidate moves? d3, rook e1, knight c3, queen e2, right? Mm-hmm. Next time you're calculating this, you'll know those are your 4 moves. You'll see queen e2 right away, sure, because you've calculated a similar line before. So if I play d4 here, you know, and black takes and we push e5 and the knight tries to go one of these 2 squares, like, we know it doesn't want to go knight g8. So you just start getting used to some of these positions, right? You know that, you know, you probably want to challenge it or get castled quickly and then challenge it. So you just start to like gain some of these patterns. You become better and better at calculating these d4 moves.
Yeah,
and then they apply to every game you play in e4, e5 as white and black.
So how would you go about, like, how should I, like, for example, if we go back a bit, would you say just try to, when I play d4 here, like, try to visualize and calculate in my head, or should I like make the moves on the board and like figure out?
Either is totally doable. And if you were like primarily planning to be a correspondence chess player, I would say like play all the moves out. You know, given your current tactical level, I think calculating these d4 moves, like 3 or 4 moves deep, is like a good exercise for you.
Okay.
So you might as well do that, because it's also working on your tactical ability, like exactly at the right level for you. Yeah. You know, so my answer to a different student, you know, because we got 100 people watching who are at different levels. My answer to each of them might be different, but to you, I would say, yeah, this is the kind of thing you can calculate, and it's like a 10 to 20 minute calculation on any of these moves that I just mentioned. Whether or not white can play d4 is like a 10 to 20 minute calculation for you. Just see what you come up with.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. And again, you don't need to find out for sure the right answer about these moves, but the calculation exercise will be good for your calculation, and the typical moves that you start discovering for white or black will make any future calculations faster and faster for you. One of the reasons that I can calculate these things faster than someone else is because the typical moves for white or black, I know what they all are. So every move, I immediately have the candidate list for white and black. Like I play d4 and I know the candidate list is knight takes, pawn takes, knight takes, and d6. And even I know that d6 is going to be wrong. So I'm not even going to look at it. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I know it's one of the 4 candidate moves, and I also know it's wrong in this position. So it's just gone. Then I just look at the others, right? And if black plays knight takes e4, I know my candidate moves are d5, pawn takes, castles, right? So I don't need to spend like a million moves coming up with my candidate move list, right? So I play the next move in my variation, right? And then after white castles, I know my candidate moves for black are, bishop e7, d5, b5, and pawn takes pawn. So I don't spend time coming up with candidate moves here either. It just speeds things up a lot. If every move you know what the candidates are. 2 moves deep and 3 moves deep and 4 moves deep. So you can see there's still a difficult skill there though, because if there's 3 or 4 candidate moves on every move,
it takes the time to.
It's like that was already like exploding in terms of numbers of possibilities. So it can already be quite difficult for me to calculate this. And that also tells you why it's like hopeless for somebody who's never calculated this kind of variation before. Somebody who's only checked on the computer that in one position d4 doesn't work because of the Noah's Ark trap. And they don't know why d4 does or doesn't work in any other position. They'll never be able to calculate it. So for you, that's a pretty good exercise to do. And if you're wrong about it, you may lose a game at some point. Maybe. I mean, you'll get like a bad position out of the opening once. You may or may not lose the game, but you'll end up down a pawn or equal pawns, but not an opening advantage for white. Oh no, like, okay, every now and then black's going to equalize against you and then you'll learn something.
I mean, I definitely agree. Like, it helps so much to just try out stuff and get familiar with like the new positions that arise. So I'm probably going to try like the exchange Ruy Lopez and like maybe an early d4 at some point.
Yeah. Hey, Falk, I've got a question for you from chat.
Sure.
If somebody doesn't want to play d4 in this position because there are so many different branches and it confuses them and they can't evaluate that, is that a good reason not to play d4? So in other words, they see d4 as a candidate move and castling is a candidate move, and they're like, I can't calculate d4, I can calculate e4, so I'll play. I can calculate castles, so I'll just castle.
So what I notice is like at some point you have to rely on your at least intuition and calculation, right? If I can calculate 5 moves deep and it's like unclear what I see at the end, I still have to rely on my feeling on if it's good or bad in the end, right?
Yeah.
So if my feeling tells me, it's like a good move to play d4 here, and I mean, if it's only an online game, right, it doesn't matter in the end. But if it's like an OTB game that matters, maybe playing like castling that I've like done before makes more sense because it's more familiar with it to me. But I don't think there's a reason to not try out a move if you seriously consider it.
Yeah.
If it comes to an online game, right? Because they're so quick and you can only learn from it in the end.
Right. So my answer is like, if you always back away from things that you can't figure out, then you'll never put yourself in a position to figure them out in the future.
Also, like, I think what chess is really good at is like teaching you how to deal with uncomfortable stuff in a way, because you always have to overcome this feeling of uncertainness at some point.
Yep.
To, like, for example, if you train like a chess course and you spend like a week memorizing this one line and suddenly the opponent plays like a move you didn't learn, you still have like to overcome this uncomfortable feeling of like not knowing what's going on. And it's like, it happens in every chess game, right? At some point you're going to get in unfamiliar territory and you have to embrace it and learn from it. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, if Daxi, if you can't calculate d4 and you don't calculate it and you avoid playing it, you'll never know whether or not d4 is good in this position or in other positions. At some point, you have to like explore these things. You have to get over like the fears and the uncertainties. And as Falk says, in every game in chess, there come moments of uncertainty. You're never going to know the answer to like every move and every decision, right? And ultimately, it's a mix of like trusting your instinct and also just saying like, okay, well, I'm going to find out. I'm going to try this thing and I'm going to find out. And that's how you like explore and learn something more and get better. So I'm strongly against like hiding from chess and like the little castle of the one series of moves you do know. I'm very much against that. That's a way to never progress.
I think it's also like a downward spiral, right? Like once you start like avoiding this uncomfortable position, you never get the chance to at least learn from it or like improve on it. Like if you always avoid playing d4, you may never figure out a new I don't know, new line that may be good or not good, right? Or you never learn from any mistakes.
Yeah. So you can, if you give into fear, you can continue giving into fear, and you can end up never exploring. Yeah. Right? And Flying Puppy Dog makes the good point that this is true in life just as much as in chess, right? In life, it's safest to stay in your parents' home forever, you know? And, you know, if you go out and meet some new people, they might be bad people. Like it might not, or, you know, they might be mean to you or whatever, you know, like you could have bad experiences. But if you take like zero risks in your life, then you won't learn as many things, or, you know, you'll miss all kinds of potentially important or valuable experiences in your life, right? So all of us, you know, just to get here, we've had to step out of safety and take some risks just to get to where we are, right? We had to play like a chess game against a human. For some people, that's a risk. They'd rather play against the bots. They're afraid of losing to a person. We all had to go out and like, you know, earn some money at a job in order to buy a computer in order to log on. So yeah, I mean, we all have to face uncertainties and learn and gain experiences. Chess and away from chess as well. Right. Charlie's living in dangerous places. I mean, when I moved to a foreign country, my parents were worried, you know, and I moved to a country where I didn't speak the language. You know, there's all kinds of different risks you can take, you know, and your parents aren't going to want you to like go to certain like areas of town or walk down a certain block at night or blah, blah, blah. And sometimes they're right. You know, sometimes they have the experience to know that some things are too risky, right? Like in this position, they would tell you, don't play knight e5, you know. I'm 30 years older than you, and I know that this move is just not good for white. But, you know, other times you have to take some risks and learn something. Okay, so that's going to be the end of today's lesson. Do you have any other questions about what we covered today, Falk?
Maybe one last thing, like quickly. I know let's say, I mean, for example, the Ruy Lopez, I'm a bit more familiar with it now, but if we look at like the King's Indian defense, right? How do I come up with ideas? Not ideas, but what we just talked about, like how do I find those moves which are like, for example, like d4, right?
Right. The typical moves that you should always be looking at.
Those typical moves, how do I find those? Is it just by looking at like Grandmaster games and trying to notice those moves, or?
I mean, just like the Ruy Lopez, this position logically has certain typical moves for black to look at and consider, and same for white. Okay. And they, you know, and they have the patterns and fit in. It would take me a long time to tell you what those are. Do you feel like you don't know what any of them are?
I mean, it's also because I played like 5 games in total, right?
Because people just haven't played d4, c4 against you very much.
Yeah, it just doesn't really happen that much.
Okay.
So I'm still unfamiliar with all of it, but...
Okay, so I mean, like the determining factors of your position so far is that black has spent time putting the bishop here, placed a pawn on d6 to help control the e5 square. You know, to try and like keep your knight from getting chased and your bishop from getting blocked.
Okay.
So I guess we know that if black didn't play d6, that at some point the move e5 would be very good for white based on where your minor pieces are. Also, you probably know that you're not going to let white have the whole center forever.
Yep.
Like you're not just going to
e5.
You're not going to castle and just play rook e8, rook f8, rook e8, rook f8 while white does whatever they want.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you need? What do you need to do to challenge the center at some point in a way that makes sense with where your pieces are?
Okay, so e5 and c5, what I kind of know.
Okay.
What people play, right?
So you do know something. So basically, there's two logical ways to approach this position for black, either c5 or e5. It's got to be one or the other. You want to trade off the pawn that's blocking your bishop. That's a good start, right? And then what's next? Well, white's got, 3 logical responses to e5. They push past it, they trade it, or they defend it with a knight.
Okay, sorry.
That's fine.
Yeah, but
So,
I mean,
again, there's going to be like a typical set of responses for white to you playing e5, let's say. And again, a typical set of responses to you playing c5, which are actually the same. It's push past, trade, or defend it with a knight. That's it.
Yeah, sure.
And then from there, you sort of start building up other things, right? Like, how do you play the positions when white plays d5? What are your plausible moves there? How do you play the position if white trades? What are your plausible moves there, etc.? They're
So
kind of
just
like different. Like, if you get a position, I need a move for white. Let's go knight f3, castles, bishop e2, and then let black play one of these moves. And again, white's got different places they can put their pieces, which are going to be better or worse for different ones of these options, right? So like you play c5. If white wants to trade, right, their bishop might have been better on d3 or e2, depending on whether or not they wanted to trade, right? So in these positions here, you're going to have a certain thing that you do, right? Which is like, oh, we're going to play for d4. That's a weak square, right? So we'll try and play like knight c6, knight d4.
Yeah.
We're going to put rooks on the d file. If instead white pushes, then we're not going to put a knight on c6, right? Now we have to come up with a different approach to this position, which is going to be either b5 or e6. Right?
Okay, yeah,
Trying to open space somewhere for one of your
makes
pieces.
sense.
Or you could say, hey, now I'm cramped, so now I'm going to look for trades. Bishop g4 trades a piece, or knight d7, knight g4, knight e5 trades a piece or something, right? So you come up with some ideas that match the positions little by little. Your progress there is just going much slower because you've had far fewer games. So what you should do is find somebody who will play d4 against you a bunch of games, right? Like Seth would, right? Seth's
Like
a
the
d4
opening
player.
exercise we had in the group lessons. Okay,
Yeah.
it makes sense.
And if you want to, you can also stop the games at move like 10 or 20 and just sort of like discuss what you think the evaluation is with your opponent. Or if you want to get more experience playing, what does a full game look like? Because you can't even evaluate yet, then play out full games, right? Because I think at first when you're playing a new position, you could stop at move 10 every game and say, so what do you think the evaluation is? And you're like, well, I don't know. I've never played a game in this opening, so I don't know if this position leads to good or bad things. So if you're at that stage, you have to play the games out. You have to get, a certain number of completed games under your belt to start saying like, oh, this position often leads to me winning, or this position often leads to trouble.
Yeah, for sure.
And once you've got that, then you can repeat more openings faster by just doing, 10 or 15 moves and discussing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it sounds like you still just need to log a lot more games with this one.
Yeah, for sure. I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
So I need to play a lot more.
Yeah. So find anyone who's willing to play d4 against you, 10 times in a row, and go do that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks a lot for the lesson. It was very insightful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wie üblich. I'll see you later.
Yeah, goodbye.